record it, we only hear what he is saying. Okay, Charles, it is all yours.
Okay, I think I'm done right. So since our L president said I was going to do this, this is what I was going to do. I'll do Dennis J. Buckley some other day. No, this is a little bit off, but Allied military government stamps of Sicily and Italy. We'll talk about this. I did this for a stamp club back in January, so that's why the January 2004 date. The U.S. Army and Civil Affairs.
Hang on just a second. Charles, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. You need to go up to your top of your PowerPoint and tell it that you want to do a slideshow, because we can see everything over on the side too, so it's not quite set up to do. There you go.
From the beginning.
From the beginning. And there we go. Perfect. Now you can start, and I'm going to mute again.
Okay. Sorry about that. So we're going to look at Allied military government postage stamps just in Italy. The Allied military government stamps were used in France, Japan, Okinawa, Germany, and a few other places along the way. This was done for Stamp Club back in January, so bear with me as we go through this. Now, the U.S. Army had a lot of involvement with civil affairs before the Civil War, but during the Civil War, and all the lost cause people, I've never heard them talk about civilians starving. They took care of the civilian population during Reconstruction. They did. The Indian Wars went back and forth. Spanish-American War, they did a lot of taking care of the population. Philippines, Panama, Puerto Rico, up through World War I, and I didn't put some of the Banana War things within it either. In 1919, Colonel Irvin L. Hunt, American Expeditionary Force, head of civilian affairs, wrote the Hunt Report. And it was a lessons learned in governing the part of the Rhineland that the U.S. Army was stationed in, Third Army. If you didn't know, at the end of World War I, Third Army was set up, and it was the Army of Occupation in Germany on the Rhineland. It slowly was dissolved, and I think the last units left in 1922. But he wrote a lessons learned. They sort of sat till nowhere, till 1940, when the Army decided, well, we aren't in World War II, but we're going to get there in soon. So they took that as the basis and wrote the Manual of Military, Government and Civil Affairs, Field Manual 27.5, and it dealt with the economic, social, and cultural and political situation when you moved into an enemy country or you were in a country not of the United States supporting your allies. In January 1942, the war started in December 41. We were at war with Germany, Italy, and Japan. The U.S. Army Provost Marshal established a school of military government. It was a 6-month course. They're already looking at they're going to be invading, moving into Europe, and they recognize they're going to have military government managing the civilian government of the country they've invaded. For you who are challenged a little geographical, Italy is located in the Mediterranean. It's the boot. There's France, there's Spain, Yugoslavia that's been broken up. This is North Africa. We got Morocco, French Algiers, French Tunisia. Italy controlled Libya, the Brits. Egypt was an independent country, but the British had a governorship over it. And I mention that because during World War II, 1940, 41, we're sending supplies to Egypt. And if you read the laws that were operating underneath that time, we could not send military aid to a country that was at war. Egypt was not at war with anybody. The Brits and the Germans were fighting in here, but Egypt was a neutral country, totally uninvolved, so we could bring our shipments in. Little side story. But anyway, here's Italy. Now, the priorities of Allied military government is to feed the civilian population that you've taken in, make sure they're healthy, make sure they have housing, and make sure they can resume commerce. That's the major thing you want to do. You want to get back in commerce to support your army. So you got to feed the population so they aren't disgusted with you. You want to keep them healthy and you want to house them. So you get this commercial, industrial, and supplies moving to take care of your own army. Operation Torch, November 8th, 1942. The Brits and the Americans land in French Morocco, French Algiers, and French Tunisia. Now, everybody came in wearing an American flag because the French are our friends. Well, it's Vichy France. It's not France, it's Vichy. And they really weren't our friends. They were ticked at the Brits, and they're also ticked at the Americans. So it is not an easy landing, and there's major fighting that takes place. The thought was, okay, it's Vichy French control. We actually had ambassadors with the Vichy French government. Admiral Leahy, who winds up as chief of staff of the armed forces, was during the 40s, in early 41, the U.S. ambassador of Vichy France. And we weren't at war with them, so we're going to just come ashore and they're going to welcome the U.S. Army. Everything we consider as is, the French Vichy government would continue to function. There'd be no need for Allied control of citizen, and we'd use the French postal system. Well, I need to mention that there was free French there, and the Vichy France found out about them and arrested them. And we're there with these guys, and the guys who were helping us land are in the French prisons, and we're not doing anything. It got real nasty. Whoops. We got 3 contenders, and I'm sorry. I took 2 years of French in college, and they promoted me to get me out of there because I could never pronounce French, and I was a waste of time. I could go from French to English. That was, but English to French was a loss. Okay. So Admiral Francis Darlan is the number 2 guy in the Vichy government. He happens to be in North Africa because his son's sick, and we capture him. And he's the one who we do the treaty with. And Darlan tells everybody to put their arms down, and we put him into charge of the government. And Churchill and Roosevelt are happy with this until the citizens of Britain and the United States finds out about this. And all heck hits. And immediately Churchill and Roosevelt complain they know nothing about this. It's all Eisenhower's dealings. Eisenhower's commanding officer of the Brits and American forces. And Eisenhower almost loses his job. Fortunately, Darlan is assassinated by a free French guy who's immediately put up against the wall and shot because they don't really want to investigate that. And General Henry Guerard, or how you want to pronounce it, steps forward. Unfortunately, he's got delusions of grandeur, and he wants Eisenhower to step aside, and he's going to take command of the Allied forces in North America and immediately lead them to an invasion of France. This doesn't play well with the Brits and the Americans. So they're forced to fall back on the guy they all hate, Charles de Gaulle. And Charles de Gaulle steps forward and becomes the head of the Free French, the guy they deal with. More than you want to know. Anyway, So with the conquest of North Africa, the next step is the invasion of Sicily and Italy, Mussolini being the head of the Italian government. Now, the major thing they know is they're going to have to control the enemy civilians. Oh, we've just experienced it in North Africa. Not only did we have the French, but we had the native population stirring up amongst us. And we've left the Vichy government basically, but we're supplying the food and everything to keep happy. With the idea going into Sicily, the State Department steps in and says, oh, you army guys cannot take care of the civilians. That's a job for the State Department. And there's a major fight going on till somebody says to the State Department is, where are you going to get all these guys to come over in Sicily and manage the country? And the State Department backs out. And it all of a sudden becomes the army job. Now, we need to back up and talk a couple things. 1924 is the Treaty of the Universal Postal Union, International Mail. The allocation of postal revenue between countries. Only stamps of issuing countries can be used in that country. Us Americans cannot take our U.S. postage stamp to Canada and mail something in Canada. They won't mail it. Sorry about that. You can only use an American stamp in the United States, only use an Italian stamp in Italy, and only a Canadian stamp in Canada. And what this also lays out is if you are sending a letter from the United States to Switzerland, and the United States takes it, puts it on a ship, the ship takes it to France, France takes it across the country and gives it to Switzerland, it lays out who gets what money from carrying this out. And the money doesn't exchange immediately. At the end of every quarter, there's a reckoning, and you add up the columns, and you see if the U.S. owns France money or France owns the United States, or if the U.S. owns Canada, okay, Canada owns the United States. Okay. Now, in July 10th, 1943, Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily takes place. Sicily is part of Italy, and we are at war with Italy. What are we going to do? Okay, a thing an invader needs to do for the civilian population, and we've recognized it. We got to feed them. We got to shelter them. We got to provide medical service. We got to really establish communications and restore the economy. Communications in 1942 is the mail, the telegram, and the phone. We got to get all this up and running. However, if we use Italian stamps, the revenue goes to Mussolini's government. And we must be recognizing that Mussolini is a legitimate government. And we claim they're illegitimate government. But if we use Italian stamps, whoa, we say they're a legitimate government, and we got to provide them with the money of the stamps we use. Whoa, if we use U.S. postage stamps, we're now saying Sicily belongs to USA. I imagine most Sicilians would have jumped up and down with joy with this. But this would have been a major propaganda victory for Germany. So we can't use U.S. postage stamps, and we can't use Italian stamps. So what we're going to do is use Allied military government stamps. These are joint issue stamps issued by the United States and the United Kingdoms. The United Kingdoms being Great Britain, England, Wales, and Scotland, and Ireland. AMG stamps. The occupier supplies, the occupied use. So we, Britain and the United States, are going to print and supply the stamps, and the local population is going to use them to mail stuff. Now, the Allied military government stamps, the postage stamps. Of course, we got all kind of documents. Well, yeah, we'll talk about this a little later. We got documents about putting this together, and this is a rush job. That's why we're going to talk about maybe whether the documents really exist or not at the time. because all of a sudden they're getting ready for the invasion, and postage stamps and mail has been very low priority on putting together the plan of getting all the men and divisions ashore in Sicily, keeping the supply and keeping them fighting. Taking care of the civilian population is in the back of the brain of the planners, have been very low, and moving mail has even been lower. And all of a sudden, Eisenhower says, uh-oh, I'm not going through this stuff with North Africa again. We need to get the mail thing taken care of. And these are some of the letters that are sent back and forth about how we're going to put together a Allied military government postage stamp. And some more information. This is the initial drawing they came up with. Allied military government. Whoa, it's got United States in, and we're using American money. 2 cents, 1 cent, 3 cents. This isn't going to fly. This is the second take at it. Allied military government, but we're still using American money, 2 cents on that. It's a little bit better, but we still got United States stuck in there. This is the next cut at it. We still got United States added, and the little block up in the right is the last cut, or it's almost the last cut. Notice it's just the same thing, but where the United States and cents is, that's all been filled in and you cannot read it. But the next thing is, it is lire that they put in. The plate block numbers. If you ever buy postage stamps and you notice that in the side alongside one of the stamps, there's a number, that's the plate number of that. And these are the plate numbers for the plates that are used to print these various denominations of stamps that we're going to use in Sicily and into Italy. This is the overprints they're going to use on some of them. And here is the final form that they come up with. Allied military postage, the artist sketch, and then you go over to the ones on the far right and the bottom, and that's what they really wind up looking like. This is one of the specimens. Now, I pause. I think I talk about this later, but just get it up. One of the problems you run into is these things are printed by a number of different printers. So the paper is different. The ink is slightly different. And there's other slight differences between the stuff. So if you're a stamp collector, I'm not really a stamp collector. I sort of play with this stuff. You can really get deep into this by what printer printed it in what country, what paper they used, and the difference in the ink in that. August 24th, 1943, the Allies are ashore in Italy. The Allied military government has come in behind the fighting troops, and they're taking control of the cities and that have been behind the lines. 10 to 20 miles behind the line is where they're operating. And the Sicily post offices are taken over, and we start issuing AMG stamps. Now, I don't know quite how to go into this, but nobody's keeping count of the stamps. Nobody's thinking of these things being money. They are printing Allied military money, but nobody is thinking about the printing of the stamps. This only happens in 1945. We'll touch upon this. So, have no faith in these numbers. Somewhere in 45, somebody goes, oh my gosh, this is money. And somebody wants to know how many we printed and what happened to them. And you notice they're all nice round numbers. Anyway, here's another one of these. This is how many were shipped. This is how many were distributed. And this is how many were destroyed at the end of the war. All nice, round, pretty numbers. Look for the 2 lira and the 5 lira. Both were 3,840,000. Somebody's having to account for these stamps. And it is amazing that no congressional investigation took place of this whole thing, because it was slapdash put together, slapdash managed, but they managed to get the job done. Okay, we've talked about this. Let's probably talk about it a little bit more. Here's the stamps that are issued for use in Sicily. 15 cents, 25 cents, 30 cents, 50 cents. I'm not going to try to pronounce this thing. 60 cents, 1 lira, 2 lira, 5 lira, and 10 lira. So those are the stamps that are used in Italy. As I said, these are in different colors. They're almost the same, but there's slight difference. The papers are different. And if you're into collecting, you get really wrapped up in this. Here's another one, a blow up of one of them. Another one to look at. And one more. Okay, here's showing them used on mail. What apparently happened was that during the 30s and 40s, stamp collecting is big in the United States. And a lot of the guys are stamp collectors. So they look at this stuff and go, oh, wow. So they just slap these stamps on. This is the stamp that's really going to get it back to the United States, because it's in U.S. mail service. But he's mailing it to a buddy. Here's the Army passed by a censor. Here's these stamps put on. This is basically for a stamp collector. This one's sent to the President of the United States. I assume this is a real one by some citizen. Another one to the President. These wound up in the President Roosevelt's collection that were then auctioned after he died for, I think, was for cerebral palsy. Another one. You notice this guy has just put every one of the stamps on him. He doesn't need all these, but this is, Sergeant is sending them back to his wife. And there's most probably a note in there saying, honey, stick these aside. This is for my stamp collection. Another one of them actually being used. Okay, I don't have a real one. The T in here means it's postage due. And one of the things they ran into problem in Sicily was that if you are writing to somebody higher in the family, you don't put a postage stamp on. The higher person in the family is supposed to pay for that. That's part of his responsibility. So it was a hard-fought battle by the Army to teach everybody had to put a postage stamp on. We don't like dealing with this postage due stuff. And this head of the family stuff. I worked with a guy, this is a side story. He made way more money than I made, and he was always broke. And I got to talking to him one day. He was out of Eastern Kentucky, and he was the head of the family. Don't know why. But anybody who was part of the family was allowed to come and asking for a loan of money or for some money. And the guy was constantly broke, giving money to other people in the family. I thought to myself, this is stupid. I would just tell everybody to take a walk. But he took it serious. He was the head of the family. Therefore, he was supposed to use all his money to support everybody else. Okay, everybody their thing. We also have captured a lot of Italians, a few Germans, and they are in prison camps. Under the Geneva Convention, they have to be able to allow to write letters. Some of the letters are going not to Sicily, but into Italy, which is still occupied by the Germans and the Italians. So this is what is being done on these stamps. They're putting PW on them, prisoner of war. So they can send this back to Italy, to Milan, Venice, I don't know, any other country you want to name, Ravenna, and it's a PW stamp. September 30th, 1944, the Allied military government returns the postal system in Sicily to Italian control. And after that date, supposedly those stamps aren't used, but they are used until they build up Italian stamps. Okay, we go ashore in Italy. The British Army crosses from Sicily into Italy on September the 2nd, 43. The American Fifth Army goes ashore at Salerno on September the 9th, almost gets pushed back into the water. It's a hard-fought battle, but we do prevail and do keep our beachhead. Now, things get really complicated. The King of Italy and his prime minister, not Mussolini, surrender and run to the Americans. And on September, they do on the 8th. On October the 13th, the king declares war on Germany. Mussolini in that says he's no longer king. Mussolini's sitting in Rome, the capital of Italy. The king and his cohorts aren't in Rome. Okay. So this causes real problems because under the Postal Service Convention, it's the government who's sitting in the nation's capital, which is the legitimate government. King Victoria, the Emmanuel III, and his prime minister aren't in Rome. They're bound in Brindisi, however you pronounce that, Italy. Okay. The Brits and the Americans have problems. They don't want to use Allied military government stamps because that says these guys are illegitimate, but they can't use Italian stamps because that says Mussolini's legitimate. Only the Americans can make stuff like this complicated. Okay, due to Italy's surrender, but Italy really hasn't surrendered because Mussolini's government hasn't surrendered. They declare this government that has surrendered as co-belligerents. As I said, but they can't use AMG stamps because they recognize the co-belligerent government as the legitimate government, but the legitimate government that we recognize isn't in Rome. Okay, complicated. On October 1st, 43, the Allies take Naples. And on December 43, the Italian government that we recognize under the king, moves to Naples. I'm going to step ahead of myself for a second. Naples is a sore pit when we get there. The Allied military medical officer put in charge, General Humes, does something that today would have him thrown in jail. He brings in all the DDT he can, and he runs people through DDT showers. He covers the city in DDT. I will tell you this much. There's no epidemic breakout. The supplies move in and move out. There's no malaria. There's no typhus. There's no other disease that breaks out during 43 and 44 because they're spraying DDT all over the place. Maybe it's not good for the environment. Maybe it's not good for the long-term health of the people. But the job they're to do is keep the port in Naples open, keep the supplies moving, to keep enough supplies for the Brits and the Americans to fight. And by golly, that's what they do. Okay. Here's the overprinting they do on the Italian stamps. Government military allies. Here's the Italian stamp. Notice they're using Italian stamps, not AMG stamps, because we are in Italy. We've recognized the Italian government. That ain't the Italian government. And for them to use a stamp, they're using an Italian stamp, overprinted, Governor, Italian ally. Here's another one. Here it is on some mail being mailed. Another one. And one more. Okay. The Italian co-belligerent government, the king and the prime minister, they're down here in Brindisi, Italy. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce words. I never learned phonetics. I learned word recognition. Okay. Drives my wife, the English teacher, up the wall. Anyway, they decide to come up with their own stamps instead of the AMG, Allied Military Government print. And the prime minister designs one stamp, and the AMG government designs another stamp. Here's the one designed by the minister, and its signature on it. This is one with the Allies come up. Romulus and Romilly being fed by the she-wolf. If you're familiar with your history of Rome, the legend is the founders of Rome were two abandoned twins who were fed by a she-wolf. Okay. This is the stamp they picked, the Barre wolf, because that's where it's printed. Here is the stamp, a sheet of the stamps, or a quarter of a stamp, I should say. Here's a mixture on the a letter, another view of it. Now, the design is in that it's printed in Naples. And once again, they're using any paper they can find. When the Italian belligerent government get to Rome, they can now use Italian stamps, and they drop the wolf stamp. They do get to Rome, July 1941. Mark Clark and the Fifth Army takes Rome on July 4th. His whole triumph is overshadowed by the D-Day landing on July 6th. He never gets to play. He wants to get to play. And there's a whole big story about whether his taking of Rome was a lost military opportunity to really get in front of the Germans and crush them. A neat story to read. We'll just throw them in. So since the co-belligerents, the king and his cohorts, are in Rome, they are now the legitimate government of Rome, of Italy. And we don't have to use the Barre wolf stamp anymore. By the way, on June 2, 1946, Italy becomes a republic and the king's thrown out the window. So they still are using the Barre stamp, but notice Republica has been overprinted on it. And this is a stamp for the Red Cross. Like some of the stamps we do at the postage office, you pay a premium and the premium goes to the outfit wanting it. Sardinia has surrendered on September the 10th, but for some real reason, we use the Italian Postal Service there, just use the Italian stamps. But I guess it's because the mail was only allowed to be used within the country and they couldn't send it overseas. I don't know. Anyway. Okay, here's I mentioned this before. 1945 comes along, and someone in the U.S. Bureau of Engraving realized it has no documentation on the AMG Sicily stamps printed in secrecy. What's going to happen when Congress says, whoa, you printed these things, you spent money. So that's why I'm not sure some of the documents I saw you were actually produced back on the date that's on them. It appears that a lot of documents were created in 45 and backdated to cover this whole thing. And also they're covering their tail. You saw the numbers on how many stamps were sent, where they were sent, and how many were destroyed. I think somebody's pulling numbers out of the air to cover this. Aha. But we have another problem that crops up. Northeast Italy. And I can't pronounce this. We'll just call it VG. It's in Northwest Italy and is claimed by both Italy and Yugoslavia. They both say it's their territory. Here it is, located up here. This was part of the Austrian-Hungary part of Italy that they controlled. When Italy gets control of this area, Yugoslavia is formed in 41. I don't know why that came down. It is a contention throughout it. This is the area, a closer map of it. Here's the Yugoslavia part control. Here's Trieste and the part the Allies are controlling. Trieste is extremely important because there's a rail line that runs directly north from here through Austria into Germany. This is why you got this fight over Trieste. They don't want Yugoslavia to get it because remember, Yugoslavia is gone a communist. Okay. April 29, 45, Yugoslavia sneaks in. April 31, the 2nd New Zealand Division enters. And there's some military confrontations between these two allies and a little bit of shooting. But the New Zealanders prevail because all you've had is some partisans who've come in. But here you got a division that's moved in, basically an armored division. The U.S. wants all of the 1939 VG returned to Italy, but Marshal Tito says, Italy got this illegally after World War I. It's really part of Yugoslavia. Lieutenant General William D. Morgan meets with Marshal Tito, and they draw the Morgan ceasefire line, just like the DMZ in Korea. And it is a garrison like the DMZ. June 9th, 1945. The Paris Peace Treaty of September 1547 finally divides VG between Italy and Yugoslavia, but it still doesn't settle the question of Trieste. Between September 2, 45 and September 30th, 47, 31 Italian stamps are issued by, quote, the Allied military government for use in VG and their overprinted AMG VG. And here they are, the types that they use. And here's a picture of it. Allied military government VG. It's an Italian stamp overprinted. Another Italian stamp overprinted. And another Italian stamp. Whoa. Oh, well, they're using the she-wolf. Another one. And another one. And one more. And one more. Here they are on a letter being used. Another one on a letter. I'm sorry, some of these I stole off the internet. I'm not really a collector of this stuff. Another one, and one more. All overprinted AMVG. By the way, this is a registration stamp because it's being mailed in Trieste. This is a first day cover. There's been a few of these. I don't know who did these. I picked this up at a military flea market a number of years ago, just for the heck of it. AMG stamp up here, and then this print over here. I assume somebody was selling these. They were also used on revenue stamps. So where the other stamps we see in Sicily and that are strictly used for postage, now we're getting AMG put on revenue stamps, AMG VG. Some more revenue stamps. Another revenue stamp. and a different revenue stamp. This is a piece of revenue paper. By that means it's an official document will be typed on it. And just like we during the Civil War official documents, you had to pay a tax on. Here's the tax you're having to pay. 10 lira. Here's another one, 2. Here's another, this is for gasoline. And here you are with your Allied military VG printed on it. I'm not sure this is for to drive a motor vehicle with a VG printed on it. Once again, a tax. The post office closes on September the 30th, 47, and mail services returned to Italy. However, the Allied military government of the Free Territory of Trieste still remains in place. So this part has been settled, but the Free Territory remains. And we're not about to give that up because we need the port and the railroad to feed our army of occupation in Germany and Austria. Established February 10th, 47 by the Security Council of the United Nations. 275 square miles around the port of Trieste, divided into Zone A and Zone B. Zone A contains 5,000 British soldiers and 5,000 US soldiers. Zone B, 10,000 Yugoslavian soldiers. The Yugoslovakians actually bring in more, and we don't quite bring in our 5,000. So what are we going to do now? We're going to use Italian stamps, but we're going to overprint them with AMG FTT. The Yugoslovakians just use Yugoslovakian stamps. Here's our Zone A and Zone B. We make sure the Zone A has got the port of Trieste. This is the main thing, that and the railroad. There's an Italian stamp, AMG FT. We'll look at some more Italian stamps with AMG FT. I'm surprised that this one slipped in. Knows the AMG here, FTT here. So the Italian sailor, soldier, and airman is displayed. Another one, Navy, Army, Air Force with the AMGT on the side, so it doesn't interfere with showing the strength. Here we go to some letters. Apparently, this was a helicopter flight for moving this. And it's done over the Republic of San Marino, which is a city-state within Italy, which is a separate country, like the Vatican is. I have looked for a book that discussed San Marino and the Vatican during World War II, how we handled those, and I've yet to find it. Okay. I'm a weird guy when I'm interested in. Okay, here once again, we got it on a document as a revenue stamp, AMG FTT. October the 5th, 1954, London Memorandum, divide free territory at Trieste. 2654, free territory at Trieste no longer exists. And simply, the Americans gave Zone A to Italy, Zone B went to Yugoslavia. Here are the military governors. I think it's interesting. The Brits used all major generals, and we used colonels. There was 200 different designs, stamps used with AMG FTT printed on them. Uh, okay, okay. Here is the badge worn by the American troops in Trieste. The lower badge, is the 88th Division, the clover leaf, and then trust was put over above it. TR is Trieste, United States troops. So, and then this was added in to show the Trieste symbol. Here's the Yugoslavian stamp. They just used the regular everyday Yugoslavian stamp. I think this is interesting. The price is set for a haircut, shave, and that by the Allied military governments. Civil affair officer down here. Post-war, I'm just throwing this in for those who weren't around. I'm born in 40. So in 46, 47, when I went to church, Catholic, St. Stephen's, there were always care posters, and we would have drives once a month. There'd be a special collection taken up to ship goods and clothing to Europe. The Marshall Plan, which I think you're familiar with, and the Freedom Train was done in 47, in which communities collected goods. They were loaded on freight cars, and the railroads transported them to, I believe, New York, where they were loaded upon ships and taken to Europe. Okay, those of you get the American Philanthropist, the February issue of this year was involved on the Italian stamps, the AMG stamps. Brigadier General Edward E. Hume, U.S. Army, MC, the most highly decorated medical officer in the U.S. Army. He's from Frankfort, Kentucky. I know his grandson, David Hume. He and I get together once a month for dinner and talk railroads. I'm sorry, we're railroad people in that. You read that article, and I think they sort of paint him as a scallywag thief. Okay, here's the deal. He's a stamp collector. He's Allied military government in Rome and elsewhere. He's moving through Italy, and he's seeing all these stamps laying around. And I know what he's saying to himself is, they're just going to trash this stuff. They're just going to throw it away. They're just going to burn it. I'm going to liberate it and send it home. And that's what he does. He's a stamp collector, and he's finding all these stamps and that. And I assume his aides and everything, when they're going around, they're cleaning out post offices, and they see these stamps and say, oh, we'll bring them back to the general. He'd be a happy camper. So they bring them back, and he's shipping them home, not by the shiploads, but he's shipping them home. And he comes back in 45. I think he dies in 46 of a heart attack. But there's no real investigation, except there's all accusations and innuendos thrown out about him and his stamps. A whole bunch of his stamps are sold by the family in Switzerland. A whole completely different story. Won't get into in that. So, but if you collect AMG stamps or Italian stamps from World War II, you most probably need to thank General Hume that they're around, because he just gathered this stuff up. And I think, personally, I suspect they would have most probably been burnt and trashed. The Italian stamps, because they were part of that evil Mussolini government, and the AMG stamps because, well, we got to get rid of these. And I think he did a great service by gathering up plates, stamps, and other things and shipping them back. It's a personal opinion, and you guys can disagree. By the way, guys, it's male and female, disagree with me 100% about whether it was a good thing or a bad thing what he did. So thank you for listening to me through this story, the AMG stamps, which is a little different for us to listen to. And I will try and pull out of this. And we're back to everybody. So you can beat me up, ask me questions, or whatever.
That's actually very interesting. I do have one question. Do you know why on some of the envelopes that you were showing, there were a number of those AMG stamps and the over postings, but there were regular stamps that were on there?
Because after you didn't have to use the MG stamps, they're still in the system. And the Italians didn't get rid of them. They just kept them in the system and used them. So they're still legitimate postage. So as long as they're not withdrawn, and unlike the United States with after a stamp's been out for 2 years, they trash them. Most countries they put them in the post office and they use them till there aren't any left. They don't, say we're going to get rid of them. Different strokes, I guess.
Okay, that makes sense. Next question.
These boys that faked the numbers for the inventories really didn't have any experience at faking numbers.
Yeah,
you never ever leave a set of zeros like that. You always ended in 392 or 397 because that looks like you actually counted the damn things.
Yeah, so you just by looking at it, you can tell they faked the numbers, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They're amateurs at faking.
Yeah, but that as I said in 45, all of a sudden they're going, oh my gosh, this has been money we're dealing with, and we got to show what happened to this stuff. I mean, even when you look at, they don't make sense. The number that they say distributed and the number they destroyed, they don't add up to the total number that was printed. Yeah, I'm just surprised. I think Congress had so many other things they were investigating. They just decided that they weren't going to get into this. And there was too many people in the Treasury Department and that who had signed off on this. It was just going to be a huge can of worms. Let's don't look at it. Let's just accept the documentation and go on with it.
Possible.
Charles, that was absolutely amazing. What a history lesson. You walked us through it. Like, that was absolutely marvelous. And thank you so much. Ironically, I have to run from here to be interviewed for a documentary on Canadians in the occupation army in the Netherlands. And my dad was in the occupation army, the Canadian Army, and stayed over for an extra year while they dealt with the civilian government in the Netherlands. And that's where he met my mom. And she became a war bride, and the rest is history. And so your background on why and how we have these civilian governments is really absolutely fascinating and quite in keeping with what I got to do next. So thanks a lot.
By the way, Peter, I'm a member of the Canadian Legion.
Oh, very good. Oh, that's great. Well, excellent. Nice to hear that, Charles. That's great.
I'll give you, I was out in British Columbia. I was leading a tour of some of the fortifications out there. I actually had some British Canadian guys take me along. We were taken to the local British Legion. And when they found I was in the VFW, they said I had to join there. I joined, and it's so inexpensive to belong to it. I just send you guys your money every year. So
oh, that's wonderful. Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much. That's great. Well, we're definitely partner countries in so many different things. So it's wonderful.
Yes.
Appreciate
Okay.
it, Charles.
All right. Yeah. It's very interesting about the Canadians in the Netherlands. I read the magazine, and they basically kept the Netherlands from starving and medical care and everything. Hats off to the Canadians. We don't think about the Canadians moving up along the Atlantic Ocean, I guess you want to call it, the channel in the North Sea, and the things they got involved in Belgium and the Netherlands. It's a forgotten part.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Yeah, my dad was D-Day +2. He was leading a convoy of oil trucks that were used when they went through the Netherlands and into Germany, loading up or gassing up the tanks, I guess. And then they reverted back into the Netherlands after the war to set up the civilian government. So yeah, but it worked for him. He found the love of his life, and there you go.
Okay.
And just a footnote to that is my mother had a cousin in from Vancouver who died of wounds in Italy in the Canadian Army.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I need to say about the Canadian Army, I think that nobody knows about the Canadian. The Canadian Army was a volunteer army. Every soldier in the Canadian Army in Europe was a volunteer. Yes, you could be drafted in the Canadian Army, but if you're drafted, you could only serve in Canada. If you were going to go overseas, you had to volunteer to go overseas. So unlike the American Army, which we got volunteers and draftees, everybody in the Canadian Army raised their hand and said, yeah, send me to Europe. I will fight. I think that's a forgotten story of the Canadian Army.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Yeah.
Charles, I'm not that familiar with how Sardinia fit into all of this. Was there a landing in Sardinia, or did it just collapse on its own?
It basically collapsed on its own. The Germans, and I've never understood this part of the campaign, the Germans withdraw from Sardinia and Corsica, and the Americans move in, and the French move into, we move into Sardinia, the French move into Corsica. They never really developed them as airfields and that. And I look at this and go, why are you guys fighting up the Italian boot? Why don't you go Sardinia and Corsica and land up on the plains at Genoa and that? But they don't, they fight up the boot. And the two islands are basically left on their own out there. Yeah, they're being fed and everything. There's some military there. They got some naval bases, but once again, I'm fascinated by World War II. I'd love to go up in the archives and spend 10 years digging the archives, but I can't afford to do stuff like that. And I'm waiting for Lee to go up there and do all that research for me and to publish the book. But Lee has fallen down and hasn't done that.
You did a nice job, Charles. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Never-
thank you.
Okay.
That was
Never
good.
even- Never even.
The next
heard of
time
any
we'll
of
do
that.
the Dennis J. Buckley.
Okay.
Okay.
Our next meeting will actually, the next Zoom meeting will be in September. And actually, that's going to be me doing part 2 of the famous ships. But we're open for the October and the November, December. So if you guys want to think about who's got what and who wants to put something together for discussion, let us know.
You want to stick me down for the Dennis J. Buckley in December then?
And Randy, you and I ought to get back on talking about the South China Patrol.
You're the one with the South China stuff. I don't have
I
any.
thought,
The
I
one
have,
covered for the Oahu.
well, okay, we'll see what we can come up with. Okay.
We have enough Yangtze stuff to do a second part of that.
True.
You know, everybody loves the China stuff.
Hmm.
So,
Somebody really, really needs to write a book of that whole era. I don't know why nobody's delved into that. It's such a fascinating part of naval history. And
Well, at Hartford, I am rooming with Henry Sweets, and I'll talk to him. Maybe we can get something going.
Yeah.
And with Greg, we could. I mean, we have all the material, or a lot of it anyway.
I think October is too early for anything like that, so I'll look for something from that maybe next year.
Okay.
I've got a couple of ideas that are beginning to percolate, so.
Yeah, I have one that I'm thinking about too. There's a the Third Reich started out cruise ships in 1934 or something. It was with the Craft of Troy organization, the Strength Through Joy. And so they had about 8 or 9 major ships going all around to Italy and up to Norway, and seeing the fjords and over to Helgoland. And the ships had their own markings. After the war started, some of these ships ended up being used to transport the Condor Legion back from Spain in 1939. And then once the war started, a lot of these ships became hospital ships. And they were called Lazaret Schiffe. And there's covers from them. The biggest maritime disaster in history was on one of these ships. About 4,000 people died as it was sunk by a Russian submarine in 1945 as they were bringing people from different places in Eastern Europe back to Germany. And that was the Wilhelm Gustloff that was sunk, and biggest maritime disaster in history. So I'm thinking about doing something with those.
And what I'm thinking, I was back literally 25 years ago, I did my first multi-frame show on my father's whole career, of which there was enough postal history to document all of it. In fact, Henry Sweets was one of the judges of it back then, but it long needed updating. And back at the time, Bob Rollins suggested I shift it to display class to move in some of the ephemera from China, particularly, that I also had. So I think I'm going to try to rework that for this. Which is probably a better format for it anyway.
So Lori,
Truthfully, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, truthfully, I think in some ways the Zoom meetings that we do allow us to have a little bit more variance in what we can and can't do as far as judging for exhibits. They can be very narrow about what they will allow or what they consider to be and downgrade.
One of the reasons I write for the log is that I got a certain amount of flack in my exhibits for more words than was entirely customary. And in the log, I can get away with that.
Yep. David and I had a very nice exhibit at Arapex that was actually on Gettysburg. It was blue and gray. We had everybody from Lee and Meade all the way down through colonels and whatnot. But we did a lot of research, and there was a lot of, and the comments that were made was, this would be really good for a library exhibit on history.
Wow.
But you talk too much.
I sympathize.
So I know exactly what you're saying. I've always said that my biggest problem with the postal history is the postal. So.
Well, Charles, can I interject something real quick? I
Yeah.
appreciate that presentation. This is the third Zoom meeting where I've learned a lot from something I knew nothing of.
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
agree with that.
That's one of the things I love about doing them and having them and
Yep.
being part of them is I always learn something.
Well, I have not missed one since I first took my first one, and I look forward to them every month. I don't know what to do. Should I call you during the months that we're not having one?
Well, we're not having
Go on
one in
YouTube.
July. Nobody volunteered for July. But we're also having a Zoom auction in July. So look for that information if you're interested. There was some really good stuff that went in the last auction. So I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I'm sure somewhere out there there's the list for looking at it.
Yeah, I'm
And then
still
of course,
looking.
August is our convention, so we're not going to have a Zoom meeting there. But we will be having meetings.
Yes, I'm still looking for the McNair and the Hornet. McNair I was on when I forget what date it was, but we were called to go down for the Bay of Pigs. And we got as far as North Carolina and we were turned around. Kennedy said, come on home. And I was a young buck that was scared.
Understandable.
But anyway,
Any-
thank you again, Charles. I really enjoyed that. I knew nothing about it, never heard anything about it, but I can at least say I know something about it now.
Well, thank you. It's when you go through the U.S. Army Green Book on Allied military government, or whatever you want to call it, there's really no mention of it. And when you go through the, by the way, that very top shelf up there, it's a selection of green books, a selection of British war histories. Their Allied doesn't do. They go into the money. The money seems to fascinate everybody, but the stamps and the communications, they don't go into, which is, I find sort of strange. But the Civil War part, there's all kind of books on communications of the letters back of getting way off on the topic. Anyway, thank you for your kind comments.
Thank
A
you.
great exhibit. Well, I know I'm seeing some of you at the convention. I know I'm seeing not some of you at the convention. So,
I mean,
A couple of months away.
yes, I've got to start putting an agenda together too. So, getting busy. Well, I'm going to say goodbye. I have some errands I absolutely have to run this afternoon. It was great to see you all. Charles, thank you again. That really was, I was kind of fascinated because it was something
Yeah.
I knew nothing about. So, thanks, guys.
Okay.
We'll see
Thank
you
you.
See you
again.
all sometime.
Bye.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.